Good evening, everyone. Today is December 5th, 2023, and this meeting of the Lake Oswego City Council is now called to order. Ms. Linder, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Buck.
Here.
Councilors Mboot.
Here.
Burdick.
Here.
Raff.
Here.
Councilor Afghan is joined via Zoom. Councilors Corrigan.
Here.
And Wendland.
Here. Thank you very much, everyone. Please stand and remove your hats and join us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we're going to start tonight moving into executive session. I'll ask City Attorney Osenek to please read the legal parameters for us.
Thank you, Mayor Buck. Members of council, the Lake Oswego City Council will now meet in executive session for the purpose of conducting deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations and to consider information or records that are exempt by law from public inspection. Representatives of the news media are not allowed to attend since this is an executive session for the purpose of labor negotiations. And we're not going to make a decision. No decision may be made in executive session. And at the end of executive session, we will return here to this room in open session.
Thank you, Ms. Osenek. Okay, we're going to adjourn and we'll reconvene in the side room, and we'll probably be back to the regular meeting around 6 p.m.
We have 20 minutes.
All right, folks, we are back in order. Thank you for your patience while we were in executive session. Next on the agenda is public comment, and we have one gentleman signed up. Mr. Dome, is that you? Please, thank you for waiting. I know you were here at the beginning. Please come on forward. You'll have 3 minutes to share with us. Yeah, please, and take your time.
No choice. Well, first you'll want a name,
Sure, yes, please. Make yourself at home. Yeah, there you go.
although I think I've given it to the lady here.
Oh, yes, but just
last name-
for the record.
I'll say it anyhow.
Okay.
The last name is Dom. That's D. David, O-H-M, Mary. First name is Patrick.
You, sir. Please go ahead and start.
I could get right to the point, or I could give you a little background.
Well, you have 3 minutes, so.
Little background?
Well, you have 3 minutes, so whatever you want to do.
Okay, fine. We're recent arrivals in Lake Oswego, not more than a year and a half ago. My wife has leased some property, which used to be the old Chamber of Commerce building, as I recall. It's located between A and B Avenues and 2nd and 3rd Street.
Yes, we know.
An alleyway.
Yeah.
And the name of her studio is Ingrid Dom Art. And as you can imagine, it's a pretty difficult place to find if you don't have any kind of signage. Well, we did have some sign put up in the property between the leased property and the property to the south. But the owner objected to that, saying that the walkway is his and you got to take the sign down. So the owner of the property took the sign down. So we're left to put a small sign above the door. And we also ordered a sandwich board type of sign. To get more to the point now, my wife was visited by a person who said he was from the Planning Commission, Code Enforcement Officer. And he said, Mrs. Dom, you must take that sandwich board sign down in front of your place. So I said, I've seen all kinds of sandwich board signs around town. Why are you targeting my wife's business? Oh, I'm not targeting her. No. So he made all kinds of excuses. Well, I thought he was targeting my wife's place because I know I've seen all kinds of signs around town. And here is just 10 or 12 of them. Fresh faces. Outside. Sweat house. And of course, one of our favorite places, because we go there often for pizza, Oven and Shaker. The new business, which is close to ours, Elite Realty. Fresh, can't even pronounce the word, ACAI, bowls and smoothies.
Mr. Dom, your time is up. I just want to, but it's okay, because, you could email us as
Keller
well.
Kitchen and Bath.
But I just want to clarify, is your contention that you have an issue with the rule itself, or you feel like it's being unevenly enforced?
Did he say stop?
Well, yes, I did, but I had a question for you. Can you just explain, do you have an issue with the rule itself, or do you feel like it's being unevenly enforced?
It's my fault. I can't quite understand it when I'm in front.
Can you hear me okay?
Can you speak to me without your microphone?
Oh, can you hear me okay? Yeah, oh, shoot. Well, can we follow up with Mr. Dom?
Actually, Director Numanolo's here. I'm going to ask her
Have I
to
shown you
follow.
enough you want me to?
Actually, the woman behind you, Director Numanolo,
Right here.
is going to take your complaint.
I can, sure, I'm happy to.
Excuse me, what do you want me to do?
So your time is up.
Oh,
So if you want to step back here,
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
happy to talk with you and
Okay.
then they'll move
Thank
on.
you.
okay, I understand.
She's going to take care of you. We appreciate you coming.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Happy to carry that
Thank
for you
you.
if you like, yeah.
Would anyone else like to provide public comment? No? Okay, just checking, just checking. Okay, so next we're going to move on to the consent agenda. We had one item on the consent agenda, and I pulled this from the consent agenda. This is the naming of the Lake Oswego Recreation Aquatic Center and the renovated clubhouse, and we'll have Mr. Andrew Holm come forward. The reason I pulled this from the consent agenda is in some offline conversations, it seemed that maybe the city council didn't have much of an interest in renaming the golf course, and was very happy with the kind of ad hoc name we'd given the Recreation and Aquatic Center, the Lake Oswego Recreation and Aquatic Center. May be able to save the department time by fishing for a name if here on the dais tonight everyone agrees that we're okay with that name, but we did have interest in hearing about the potential naming of the clubhouse and hearing from you as well on it, since we hadn't before.
Okay, great. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Ivan Anderholm, Parks and Recreation Director. With what you said, Mayor, really the purpose of us coming before you, or me coming before you this evening, is actually to initiate the process. As you're aware, you as a council passed Resolution 2243 that outlined a new policy and process for naming city areas and facilities. So in that, really the purpose of this evening was for council to initiate the process. And the department was going to ask the council to refer it as the first step to the Parks, Recreation, Natural Resource Advisory Board so that we could discuss the possible names with them and then have them come forward with a recommendation for those names. Tonight, I do not have names that I'm ready to move forward with. However, I think that if you initiate the process and if council wants to give us preferred names to that, we can take those preferred names along with others to the board. And as you're aware, with the process, when we officially bring those to you as names, in this process, we're trying to make it so that you don't have to refer it back to a board and commission for the proposed names. So you will, at the next time when we bring the names forward, the council will have the option to accept the name that's being proposed or come up with a new name. Or the third is you could refer it back to the Parks Board and the community for another effort for a name. But tonight, really the process was we just wanted to initiate and let you know that we want to initiate the process. Per the policy, we need to have a name within 6 months of the new facilities or reopening the facilities. The issue that we have is that we need to do that well ahead of that time because the facilities are going to have names of the facilities on them. The golf course is going to have printed materials that we need to have ready for when it's open, so we can't wait until that time. So really what I'm asking for is if you want to initiate that process, give me a list of what you think would be good proposed names. I will take those forward to the Parks Board along with other names. They will bring a recommendation, and then you as the council can make the decision on what to name the three facilities.
Thank you,
Mayor,
Director
I think
Anderholm.
there's a fourth option.
What's the fourth option?
I suppose the fourth option would be that we could make the decision tonight.
Well, yeah, I want to clarify.
And you could, yes.
Yeah,
I didn't want to remove that
But on the
option.
dais, I just want to make sure if, because the golf course is named, the Lake Oswego Municipal Golf Course has a name, and yes, we've remodeled it, but it is a named facility. Does anyone here have any interest in changing the name of the golf course? Okay. No one is interested in changing the name of the golf course, so
Okay.
that sounds like a done deal. the Lake Oswego Recreation and Aquatic Center, as we've been calling it, does anyone have an interest in pursuing a different name other than the Lake Oswego Recreation and Aquatic Center? All right, so we would like LORAC to be the name of the pool facility. Are folks interested in allowing Director Anderholm to pursue a process with the Parks Board about naming the clubhouse, the renovated clubhouse? You're not, well, I'm more, yes, clubhouse?
I'm okay if
Clubhouse.
it's,
Okay, there's majority support, some dissension. Okay. Go through a process to name the clubhouse.
Okay, so to clarify, what I will do is I will come back after the next Parks Board meeting. It is on their agenda to discuss the naming, and I will come back to council with a recommendation of LORAC or Lake Oswego Recreation and Aquatic Center for that facility, the Lake Oswego Municipal Golf Course for the golf course, and then the third name to be determined for the old clubhouse.
Yes, they do not
Yes.
need to waste time going through an exercise.
Right.
Okay,
The golf course, yeah. We
excellent.
already decided.
of which clubhouse could be an option.
Clubhouse could be an option, and if I could just interject a little bit on the clubhouse. The reason we're trying to get away from the clubhouse is our golf operations will not be in that facility. It's going to be repurposed. Our golf operations will be in the LORAC, so we want to actually try to avoid some of the confusion with people walking up.
And you have new uses, renting
Yes.
out the space, and so we can, I think, see
Yes.
the reason to name it for marketability purposes.
Yep, excellent.
Okay, so I guess let me move. We have a kind of adopted or a little bit of an amended resolution here, so we'll move to initiate the process to name the recreation center in a court, the Lake Oswego Recreation and Aquatic Center, and the clubhouse for a name to be determined based on the advice of the Parks Board. And in the clubhouse, yeah. But we haven't officially named, so in the end, I'm sure we'll come back with something to make it official that we're going to call it the.
Yes, what I intend to do is bring back the three names, and you'll weigh in on the new clubhouse name, and then at that meeting, you will officially name the three facilities.
Okay, that's my motion. Second. Okay. All right, any further discussion on this? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we hear you, Councilor Afghan, thank you. Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you being here. Okay. Next on the agenda is a public hearing on Resolution 23-35. This is a resolution of the City Council revising fees and charges and updating the Lake Oswego Master Fees and Charges Schedule. Attorney Osnak, will you please review the hearing procedures for us?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Buck. Members of council, now is the time set for a public hearing. Sorry, on Resolution 2335. And this is a purely legislative decision. It's within your discretion. This is a legislative decision that also has to comply with the state laws around budgeting. But our public hearing process today will begin by a presentation from staff. Testimony will then be received from the public. Individuals will be allowed up to 5 minutes. Recognized neighborhood associations, homeowner associations, government agencies, or other incorporated public interest organizations will be allowed up to 10 minutes. Time limits should not include time taken up by questions from council, responses to such questions. Any person in attendance may cede his or her time for testimony to another person, but in no case shall any person's testimony be increased to greater than 10 minutes. For the council, are there any conflicts of interest, which in this case does not include ex parte contacts or site visits? It's just financial conflicts of interest with regard to these budget items.
No.
Seeing and hearing none from Councilor Afghan, we're ready to proceed.
Thank you. Director Cross, welcome.
Good evening, Mayor, Councilors. Sean Cross, Finance Director. I came here a couple weeks ago with the study session on this. There weren't really any changes. There was one question on what is the $1 stall fee. That's like for the parking lots that we own, like on First and B or by the Gemini. If something like the Gemini wanted to run I don't know, say a Saturday luncheon or something like that, and they wanted to rent it, that's what that fee was about. Or it's $1 per stall per hour. So I guess they rented it for, yeah.
The things we learned.
$1, yeah. Then the other one, we needed to update the Public Services franchise to when we had done the draft. That was still ongoing, and so we've updated in the latest version. The one other change, though, that we did make from what was initially in here is the Parks Athletic Field, what the LOSD was getting charged was, and the initial one was Category 3. That's on page 30 of the master fees and charges, but then we've now moved it to Category 2 to be very similar to how their charges are for us in their manual. And that's it.
Does anyone have any questions for Director Cross? Okay, thank you. We'll, with that, we'll open the public hearing. I'll ask if there's anyone here who'd like to testify. And seeing no one, close the public hearing and entertain a motion.
Move to adopt Resolution 2335.
All right, any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, any opposed? Okay, thanks, Councilor Afghan. Motion passes 7-0. Thank you, Director Cross. Great. Okay.
Less
Next.
than 300 words.
Right. Yeah, no fee for his words in the book, huh?
I know.
Next, moving on to council business item 8.1, we have consideration of ordinance 2928. This is an ordinance of the city of Lake Oswego amending LOC chapter 50.03.002, chapter 50.03.003, 50.03.004, and 50.10.003. All of chapter 50, the Community Development Code, establishing psilocybin time, place, and manner land use regulations and adopting findings. This was LU 23-0001. And we welcome Director Numanalu to present this item to us.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening. Oh, is there any preamble from the City Attorney's Office? No, I can just go right into it. Thank you. Good evening, Councilor and Mayor and City Councilor. I'm here before you tonight, consideration of Ordinance 2928, which is an ordinance that would adopt local time, place, and manner regulations for psilocybin. And I have a very brief presentation. It's about 5 or 6 minutes. And I'll start out with a brief background. As you may recall, in December of 2022, the City Council enacted Ordinance 2903, which established a temporary ban on psilocybin facilities in the city. And at that time, the council also directed the Planning Commission to consider adopt potential time, place, and manner regulations that would apply in addition to the state and Oregon Health Authority rules. And the City Council did consider the recommendation by the Planning Commission in this summer. It happened on July 18th. And at that meeting, you considered the recommendation of the Planning Commission, which was 2 ordinances. The first was the Land Use Ordinance, 2928, and that included regulations such as establishing which zone the psilocybin facilities would be allowed in, buffers between certain uses, and then also a prohibition on the use as a home occupation. The Planning Commission also recommended a non-land use ordinance, which included regulations regarding access to weapons, liability insurance requirements, and then also about the release of clients after an administrative session to a sober adult. At that meeting, the council was split on the Planning Commission recommendation and ultimately did vote to tentatively approve both ordinances recommended by the Planning Commission. The vote was 4-3. The council also voted to tentatively recommend that staff bring back an ordinance that would repeal the temporary ban on psilocybin facilities. That final vote was scheduled for August 1st, but it was delayed for various reasons, and the council did not take it up again until your October 17th meeting. At that meeting, the mayor, during council business, acknowledged that the council was split on the issue of psilocybin in the city and suggested an alternative path in order to gain a stronger majority from the council. And the council unanimously voted to direct staff to return tonight with an amended package, which would have an alternative to what the Planning Commission recommendation was. And that was to bring forth an Ordinance 2928 with 2 provisions removed. One was to remove the buffer requirement between psilocybin facilities, as well as a buffer requirement from tenant spaces occupied by businesses that have an OLCC liquor license. And then the second was to not prohibit psilocybin facilities from being in the same building as healthcare facilities. The second component was to not bring forward Ordinance 2933, which was the non-land use ordinance regulations for adoption, and to not bring forth an ordinance that would repeal the temporary ban on psilocybin facilities. And so as directed by the council, tonight I've brought to you a revised Ordinance 2928, which is included in your package as Exhibit A12. An attachment to that is Attachment B, which has the the draft code amendments, which includes red line edits to show you those provisions that you directed staff to remove. And if the council votes to enact the ordinance tonight, there's also draft findings included as Attachment A. If you vote to enact this ordinance tonight and take no other action, the temporary ban on psilocybin facilities will remain, and it will be referred to the voters at the November 2024 election, and they will decide whether or not to repeal the temporary ban. If the voters do repeal the ban, by adopting the ordinance tonight, you will establish local time, place, manner regulations that will apply in addition to the state and Oregon Health Authority rules. If voters do not repeal the ban, then of course psilocybin would not be allowed in the city. So that is my short presentation. I'm happy to take any questions that you have. Otherwise,
Presentation, thank you.
to you.
Okay, questions. Counselor Wendland, go first.
Thanks for the brief but succinct presentation. I've got a couple questions that manufacturing. Anything in here allows manufacturing in Lake Oswego? No, is that correct?
So this ordinance, if it's adopted, if it is allowed in the city, manufacturing would be allowed in the city in the industrial park zone only.
Okay. Okay. And is our industrial zone far enough away from school sites and?
So the buffers would still apply. They'd still have to be at least 1,000 feet from any school or registered childcare facility, in addition to being allowed in the IP zone or the I zone. I'm sorry, it's allowed in both of our zones. So that's the foothills and then the IP zone, which is the Southwest Employment Area.
Okay. And is that a requirement of the state that you have to allow for the manufacturing? Or can the two be separate?
If you separate them out, then the question of whether to repeal the ban on manufacturing would still have to be referred to the voters. So you could allow the client administrative service centers and keep the ban on the manufacturing, and then it would go to the voters in November.
And that could be decided at that point or not? I mean, if we pass this tonight, then we're locked into heavy manufacturing in Lake Oswego.
If the voters repeal the ban in November, yes.
The advantage of doing, of enacting it for industrial areas is that the state requirements are the buffer around schools, but the Planning Commission's ordinance also includes childcare centers.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, this would be
Right.
more restrictive than the state's level if the voters elect to lift the ban.
Right. No, I'm just saying that there's, I think, a difference in creating the drug versus administering the drug. That's my sort of line to a certain extent. Not that I'm completely for or against it, but I just feel that we need to be aware that we're allowing manufacturing of this drug in Lake Oswego.
The voters overturned the ban.
Yeah, we're voting to ban it. They repeal what we're doing tonight.
Yeah.
Oh, I understand how the process works, and that was point number 2, but I'll have that under discussion. Well, I guess my question is, under this language, will we be able to make a voter decision that will be understood by the voters in a very clear and concise way? Because it's kind of like it's a double negative when we are talking about this. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And
You don't want to get in the 110 issue. Or
No,
yeah, I don't want to get into the 110 issue or the fact that we had such confusion over our parks issues, that people continue to ask questions, and I think many people were confused, and it took too much time and effort to try to explain things, and I just want to make sure voters know what they're voting for.
Yes,
I guess
he's
that's my
asking
point.
the process, I think, for
Yeah,
when we refer.
so a lot of other jurisdictions have already sent their bans to the ballot, so we'll take a look at how they refer them. And also, I don't know if the original measure has a requirement in it about what the referral has to say, but we'll be back in front of you probably in the summertime.
I think by July, I think.
Yeah, in the summertime to actually have you to make the referral. And so you'll have a chance not only to look at the ballot title language, but also all the other things that we'll be submitting to the ballot. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add.
Just your note is taken that in drafting the explanatory statement, that you want it to be clear, because as you just pointed out, there's sort of a double negative, and you want it to be very clear what the voters are deciding about, including this issue of manufacturing versus
Right, and that's
service.
up for discussion on the manufacturing part. I just want to make it clear that I think we had a discussion point throughout this process that there was the delineation that you could have administration and you could have manufacturing, one of either or. And I think the council should consider if we do want to have administration of it and manufacturing, or not have manufacturing in it. That's my only.
I'm confused. Are you suggesting that we allow manufacturing and don't refer to the voters?
No. What I'm saying is that,
What we're doing, though.
Yeah, but
I guess what I'm saying is that, does council feel comfortable moving forward with having manufacturing in Lake Oswego under this current?
If the voters overturn it, we don't have a choice.
if the voters say what we
There's no
decide,
option that just says we don't
Yes,
have
yeah.
it, and you don't even get a vote on it.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
I think he wants to bifurcate.
Yes.
Bifurcate manufacturing and administration.
Oh, I see. You want two questions on the ballot.
Question, okay, on the ballot.
I mean, I think what he might also be saying is,
Do we
I'm
want
fine
as
with the
council-
administration going to the voters, but maybe how do we feel about
Agree.
just
We should-
eliminating, I don't know if we can eliminate
what
manufacturing.
I'm
at all.
saying.
Yeah. So it's got to be the same. We don't have an option
Is that
of
what you're
not
saying?
manufacturing.
Do we have an option
Ellen,
for
do
not
we have-
manufacturing?
Yeah.
No?
No.
It's all kind of one
Council's
bucket.
right,
It's-
but we can't bifurcate the issue, but
Okay.
to put it a slightly different way, although you all cannot bifurcate this issue and say we are not going to allow manufacturing and that should be the final decision, what I'm hearing clearly is that, at least in terms of the voters, what you want to make clear is that their decision is not simply whether to allow service centers, but they must grapple with the fact that if they allow service centers, they will also be allowing manufacturing.
Correct. Right.
Or, sorry, I'm not raising my button, or could you only put to the voters the time, place, manner restrictions on the administration of it, and leave our rules and regulations, time, place, and manner on manufacturing? Are you able to bifurcate it that way? Or is it all one lump sum, no matter what?
I think the answer is, it would be difficult to bifurcate them in that way, but let me look and see. I think
I think that's what I'm hearing Councilor Wendland ask, is maybe, is there a way to?
Because all I'm saying is it could become an issue where people start, if we do want the administration of the drug to happen, but people say, oh my gosh, I don't want drug labs in Lake Oswego.
I see that.
Okay? That could be a headline, and then people will maybe not be.
It could also
Looking at
prevent
that.
those who want the administration in there from actually getting what we want. It could
Right,
get in the way.
That's maybe the key of
think
what
it's
they
smart.
like, but it could be a
smart
separate
call.
part. So anyway,
But I will say this, I think you're probably aware of it, but just for the record, if in fact you referred both of these twin issues that I think may not be able to be bifurcated to the voters, and they said, even considering that maybe we don't want manufacturing, we do want this, so we're going to say yes to both, the council still has the opportunity to then decide for itself what time, place, and manner restrictions you might wish to place simply on the manufacturing side of things. So, and I know you're
Okay.
aware of that, but it's just, I just want to, be certain that it's not as though if the voters were to approve the manufacture and consumption of psilocybin at Lake Oswego, that you cannot still initiate a process to impose regulations, particularly because, as your findings indicate, what you all are trying to do today is to say there are some impacts that are too speculative for us to feel comfortable regulating at this point. And so we'd like to see how it plays out. So you have definitely left yourself an opportunity if, in fact, the manufacturing concerns that you have identified and you think voters might have, that you all have a second bite at the apple to address those impacts. But I want to be clear that I understand your point, which is, but the voters need to be very clear about what it is they are choosing to vote on, and to the extent that maybe some folks would like information about council's ability to impose regulations, that might be something you would want me to consider in drafting the explanatory statement.
Right.
Okay, that's a good question. So when we come back by the summer, we'll have researched whether or not we can split it into 2 questions, and we'll talk about it. Good question. Okay, Councilor Bupin, then Councilor Afghan on Zoom.
Yeah, I hear you. Like, yeah, it's, I never have that idea that we could, like, when we repeal, we already repeal we said that we cannot manufacture, we cannot use psilocybin in Lake Oswego. And now we are asking the voters, do you agree with what council said? If they say yes, which means they uphold what we say, so there's no way of manufacturing. It's over. There's no psilocybin in Lake Oswego. That's it. But if they say yes, is there, and that's where I agree. If they say yes, time and manner and place, they can do it here, but can they manufacture, can they do the stuff here? I think if it's allowed, they can do it.
Yes, that's correct. If manufacturing would be allowed,
Yeah.
and it would be limited only to the industrial park and industrial
yes,
zones.
Yeah. And therein lie the rub.
It could be the rub for people.
Yep, that's yeah, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Bupin. Councilor Afghan, good day.
Good day. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think in July, when we have this conversation, we need to talk about what does manufacturing means. Because if we are talking about a pharmaceutical company or chemical manufacturing that does this product, that's one conversation. But if it is a agriculture, farming, growing, that's a different conversation. So I do agree with Councilor Wetland that in July, when we talk about these definitions and whether we're going to put it to the voters and then restrict it later, I think that's the time we need to have all of these conversations. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilor Afghan. You know a thing or two about drug manufacturing, don't you?
All of them legal.
We'll just leave it at that. Okay. All right, does anyone else have any questions? Okay. Would someone like to make a motion?
I'd like to move to enact ordinance 2928.
I second that.
Okay. All right. Motion made second. Any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes 7-0. Thank you, Mr. Monalou. Thank you, Ms. Osnak. Okay.
Well, that was
Good
the
questions,
shortest
everyone.
amount of
Good
time
work
that I
on
thought
that
we would
topic.
spend on
We've
this.
talked about that. We talked about that today.
It's always the political action kind of like angle.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, good job, everyone. That was good working together. We went from split to unanimous. Look at that. That's how we do it. Yeah. Yeah, good job, council. That was really good work. Okay, so next we move on to our study session, and we're going to welcome Mr. Olson. We are having.
Because we have to do it regardless, but yeah. Yeah, we gotta We gotta roll this out somehow. But yeah, the project, of course, is the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities Project, just for continuity, I suppose. So I'm really here to continue the conversation, share some new information that we were able to gather, and talk you through a proposed public engagement plan, more or less, for the project, kind of in response to some of your comments from the last time we spoke. So there's about 30 slides in this deck, including title slides. I will try to move quickly. Of course, as usual, questions and discussion can follow, but feel free to interrupt me along the way. All right, so just to start with a bit of background and review of the CFEC rules and purpose, and a bit of new information about how we've seen parking requirements impact business in Oregon as well as in the city itself. So just a quick overview. You've seen this slide many times before, but just to quickly remind us that we have already sort of complied with Phase A of the CFEC rules, which require us to remove or not enforce minimum parking requirements within a half mile of essentially bus line number 35. So you can see the map. All the areas in yellow currently have no parking requirements for any use. We've also complied with the EV charging requirements as well. Kind of the current task at hand is to update the TSP, Transportation Systems Plan, per CFEC requirements. That's something we have to start by November of 2024. So anyway, we will get you more clarity on that, but it's something that we're going to be undergoing next year, either beginning it or moving further than just the beginning. As well as really the primary sort of entree for our discussion tonight is Phase B of the parking requirements, which is most of what we've been talking about. So I just wanted to share with you a slide that I developed. It was kind of a request of the Planning Commission. At their request, I did some research into the legislative history of the parking requirements we have here in the city. So I want to share those with you. It's kind of consistent with just the general trend. We adopted our parking requirements, and they've kind of remained in more or less the same form since 1961 when they were originally adopted. They've been added to, but for the most part, they're very similar sort of numerical relationships and formulas for parking. It was essentially based on looking at nearby cities, like what are you guys doing, as well as looking into the handbooks from the 60s or even the 50s probably at that time from the Institute of Transportation Engineers. And there are a lot of specific parking requirements for things like a taxi stand, an ultralight flight park, a pet cemetery, things of that nature. And they had developed through a lot of hard science, they had developed specific parking requirements for all of those different uses. So it's kind of absurd, but that was kind of what most cities based their parking requirements on. And actually digging through the minutes from some of what we currently still have on file back in 1961, the city attorney at the time, we were talking about originally adopting parking requirements.
I would, as the city attorney, I would just like to say, A, can't believe you called us out like that, and B, I have enormous respect for any city attorney that is willing to say, I have no solutions to offer you.
Yeah. This is in the official meeting minutes from 1961 on November 2nd, so crazy to see, but I just thought I'd find that or share that with all of you because I found that to be interesting. All right, so just kind of talking a little bit more about some slides that I've developed recently that I haven't shared with you yet that I thought you'd be interested in. These are some slides that I developed for a presentation at the Chamber of Commerce that talk about some of the impacts of CFEC and parking requirements on businesses in Oregon, as well as in Lake Oswego, just parking requirements and their effect on businesses. So throughout the state so far, I think we've talked about this, or Evan Manvell from DLCD mentioned this, but we've seen reduced barriers for new businesses in different parts of the state that have actually reduced those parking mandates pursuant to CFEC. So in Central Point, you can see on the left there's a building that had non-conforming parking lot, and they weren't able to propose a new use within that building because of that non-conformity originally. With the parking reform, they were allowed to allow a new use, a new business to locate in that building, and it was able to comply due to those reduced mandates. So a new business was able to appear in Central Point. Similarly, you can see on the right, there's the owner of a arcade in Tigard. This is located in a strip mall sort of setting where It's a pretty fixed scenario. You can't go in and sort of change things around as a tenant and add new parking spots to this location. So he had struggled to obtain a liquor license, which had some implications on the parking requirements in Tigard, apparently. When the new state rule took effect, he was able to essentially add that sort of beer component to his business and was able to meet parking requirements and expand his business, I guess, as a result. So we have some examples from here in the city too of not necessarily where reduced mandates have helped, but where we've seen parking requirements really have an impact on businesses here in the city. So just to sort of begin this conversation, many multi-tenant buildings rather in the city we've talked with about this particular issue, and a lot of them have been required to essentially pay for parking studies in order to allow new retail uses to locate within an existing development or something that had already been constructed. So essentially, what happens is somebody like Elephants, for instance, might come into the city and say, we want to locate here on Mercantile Drive. Come to the planning counter, have a conversation. Are we compliant? Do we need more parking? Turns out they didn't have enough parking based on the numerical requirements in the code. The code does allow another option for a parking study, for people to undergo a parking study, which would sort of more specifically look at the proposed use and the actual anticipated trips that it would generate. But it's something that is a huge barrier for a lot of businesses. It's extremely expensive. In addition to our sort of application fee of about $4,500, it requires several thousands of dollars to actually have an engineer go out and do that work. So you can see how that can be a big barrier. And these are just two examples of buildings where, these are successful examples of buildings where tenants have been able to locate, and through that parking study, were able to meet their parking requirements. More often, though, in the city, it's not such a sort of, even those examples were successful, but they were very costly. More often throughout the city, those parking standards just prevent new businesses from being located here, period. So, more often they're sort of looking at that numerical table in the code for parking requirements, and they have a lot of difficulty filling spaces in multi-tenant buildings throughout the city because of essentially it's a fixed amount of parking that's kind of developed, and they might have a new tenant interested in coming in, and you look at the parking requirements, or how many parking spaces does your restaurant require? Oh, sorry, we don't have enough. And that's the end of the conversation. And so this is unfortunately fairly common in Lake Oswego. At the planning counter in particular, this is a really bummer conversation that we have to have fairly often. But this is the reality. So we see this happening fairly often in the city in places like the ones you see on the screen, Cruz Village, retail buildings on Boone's Ferry. Here's a few other examples. No, it was in that structure though. What's that?
Where the fun place is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's over in one of the empty spaces.
Okay, I was just like, oh, parking requirements for a car wash. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I was really kind of freaking out for a minute.
And so, we've seen this in other areas of the city, a lot of the shopping centers along State Street, as well as others on Boone's Ferry and 710 Center Point. This has also been an issue where businesses want to come to Lake Oswego, and we have to kind of, not an official denial of a permit, but we do as staff have to kind of say, you wouldn't be able to meet your parking requirement here. So I just really wanted to share that because I thought it was pertinent to this conversation. All right, so any questions on that information before I go into some of these high-level pros and cons? All right. So again, it's kind of something that was requested by the Planning Commission. I developed some high-level pros and cons for the different CFAC options. As you're all aware, these are the options. We've seen this slide a million times at this point, maybe not a million, but you're familiar with it. Option one is fairly simple. The rest are much more complicated. That's basically the overall takeaway here. But I created my own version of this that I hope is better, but it's I tried at least. But really what I wanted to point out here is that obviously we have option one, that's very straightforward, repeal of minimum parking requirements citywide. But for option two, I broke it out into two different sort of sub options, if you will, and I'll try to use that for the A and B discussion. So those are sub options for both options 2 and 3, there's these additional kind of A and B options. So I will explain this a little bit more as I go on, but essentially I just want to point out that there are 2 different analyses for option 2. One involves the selection of provision A, which involves removing parking mandates within quarter-mile town centers and within town centers. And the other one is essentially 2B would be the option that would result in sort of the most parking required. And that's a parking management approach in addition to the fair policy sort of baseline provisions. So 2 different options within option 2. I'll talk a little bit more specifically about them later, but here's just kind of a quick overview of what the options are. All right, so this is the easy one. Option 1, you repeal all parking mandates citywide. It's easy to explain. It's already been adopted in many cities throughout the state, including some that are similar to Lake Oswego, others that are a bit larger, and some that are smaller. So just to go over some of the pros and cons that we developed, and I'll try to keep this pretty quick. But as we've discussed before, this is a very simple option. It would be very easy for staff to explain at the counter and for folks who come in and talk to us to understand. It would reduce the amount of time that staff spends looking into these sort of questions on parking requirements and just administering them on various development review applications. It would involve minimal to no additional costs. I'm trying to think of some of the potential costs here, and it's hard to, but I don't want to say there would be no cost. It would be the most flexible regulations that we could adopt for parking when it comes to businesses, and this would be a citywide impact. So we would have flexible regulations that would allow, for a pretty flexible location of new businesses citywide. And that goes for just all development as well. So it would provide flexibility for housing as well as, any other type of development citywide. I'm stressing that geography because that will be an important distinction between some of these options. It would reduce the cost of development, particularly for housing. Again, on that citywide scale, it would be a consistent requirement, so it would consistently sort of eliminate those requirements citywide, and that would provide sort of a elimination of that regulatory barrier that we've identified. It would primarily apply to new development or changes of use, although there could be a situation where perhaps an existing development would come into the city and say, I want to revise or modify my development review permit such that I would no longer have required parking under the new provisions. So it doesn't only apply to new development or changes of use, but it benefits existing uses, if anything, if they choose to take advantage of this. But for the most part, it would mostly apply to new development. And again, as we discussed previously, this is a sort of market-based approach that would allow the market to really dictate the amount of parking that's provided in a particular development. The main con here, potentially the only con, and it's a big one, is that it could result in parking overflow into neighborhoods in some instances. And so we don't necessarily know exactly where that could occur. It's a bit difficult to predict. So we'd think that over the long term that the city might need to keep an eye on this, monitor any instances where that's occurring, and potentially implement parking management policies that could mitigate the overflow effect. So it's not a guarantee that it will or will not happen, but we, more than other options, we might expect that under this one. But there would be a lot of sort of tools within what the city could do to actually fix that problem sort of on a site-by-site or case-by-case basis. So it wouldn't necessarily, I guess I can answer questions about that, but I just want to point out that that's the biggest, if not the only, con for this option. All right, so moving on to options 2 and 3, really, wanted to point out that there are these 8 baseline provisions that would apply for any of these options. So we already comply with a few of them, but there are some additional sort of complications here. We'd have to reduce parking mandates for accessible units, which isn't a bad thing, but it's just kind of adds a layer of complexity, I suppose, as well as car sharing spaces, et cetera. So there are some, positive things here, of course, incentives for sustainable infrastructure and incentives for electric vehicle charging. So there are some, positives as well as some sort of complexities involved with the baseline provisions here. But these would be required for both 2 and 3. And again, getting back to the sort of sub-options here, when it comes to options 2 and 3, both of those options, you have to pick one of these sub-options, A or B. A would involve removing all parking within, or requirements within a quarter-mile distance of climate-friendly areas. Just as a reminder, that's downtown and Lake Grove. Mostly would apply to Lake Grove, though, as I'll explain in a moment. Or option B would be to manage parking through adopting a paid parking benefit district with paid on-street parking, and the idea is that you'd use the revenues to on public improvements in that area. It would also require the city to reduce parking regulations to a half space per unit for residential in climate-friendly areas, as well as removing all commercial parking requirements within climate-friendly areas. So just kind of to talk about what that means for Lake Grove, because as you've likely noticed, we've already kind of implemented a lot of CFEC sort of reductions of parking requirements on the west side of this, or I'm sorry, on the east side of the city, but on the west side of the city in the Lake Grove Town Center, we haven't done that yet, so that's really where this Phase B would primarily be sort of, where a lot of the impacts are definitely going to be happening, where, positive and negative, or mostly positive depending on your selection. But I just wanted to point out, though, that under any of the options, basically all commercial parking requirements would be eliminated in Lake Grove. There are no alternatives that wouldn't allow us to do that. And so another thing I just want to point out is that that's also relatively true for residential. For the most part, all the options except for option 2B would remove all parking requirements for residential in the town center. Although option 2B would just limit that to a half space per unit. So a reduction as opposed to a removal. So that's just kind of an overview of how this would apply in Lake Grove. All right, so with option 2, I think, again, this is very familiar, but there you have to select essentially 2 of the 5 provisions you see on the screen. You have to select 1 from 1 through 3 and 1 from 4 through 5. Essentially for the purposes of this analysis, I selected 3 and 4. So it's kind of provision 3 here is the flexible commute benefit provision, and provision 4 is the tax on commercial parking lots. I selected those as just kind of assuming that we would choose those if we went down this road of option 2, because it's kind of the lowest, it's maybe the easiest, I suppose, for the city to implement. The commercial parking lot tax would be pretty easy for us to comply with because we don't have any commercial parking lots. So that seems like a easy kind of selection there. But probably the biggest thing to point out here is that flexible commute benefit would be the newest sort of provision. It would be the most substantial, I guess, provision out of this option that would be implemented. So that's, as opposed to looking at the bundling, which is would require the city to sort of figure out how to do all sorts of things related to regulating and monitoring unbundled parking and requiring that happens on all existing developments. This would just impact employers of 50 or more employees within the city, option 3. So it is the easiest of the first 3 options, if that makes sense. So those are the ones that I assume that we would go with if we were to go with option 2. So option 2A, as I pointed out before, we select 3 and 4 from this kind of menu, and we would select A from this menu. So we remove all parking mandates within the climate-friendly areas. And that's the fair parking and reduced mandates approach. You can kind of see the pros and cons on the screen, and I'll just go over them broadly. It would be a lot more difficult to explain and for folks to understand at the counter. Not only would there be different parking requirements depending on the location, kind of specific, to your proximity to a town center, but also there would be different provisions that would apply to accessible units and just various different features of the development that would involve reductions to your parking requirement that would just add complexity. And that would sort of increase the staff workload trying to figure out how to easily explain and sort of interpret this for the public. It would be more costly to implement, mainly due to that parking benefit district, the on-street parking, that's for the next, This would be costly to implement because of the flexible commuter program. I apologize for that. Again, that would add a significant amount of complexity because that's something the city doesn't currently do. that would require new regulations and compliance monitoring as well. Of course, this would still involve some reduction of parking requirements within Lake Grove, so you'd see more flexibility for new businesses, particularly in Lake Grove, all development as well in Lake Grove. The reduced costs would apply mainly within that area, a quarter mile from Lake Grove. One of the pros here is that the parking is only required in locations that are further from transit or less walkable, so there is some type of relationship there. And there's some reduction of regulatory barriers, but again, it's very complex. Regulations depend not just on location proximity, but also on sort of specific types of uses and them in sort of a more fine-grained way than what we currently implement in the city. And they would have differing impacts in different parts of the city, so it wouldn't be that consistent application as with option one. One of the biggest things I want to point out is that flexible commute benefit program would apply to existing buildings. So existing employers of 50 or more employees within the city would have an impact. They would be required to adopt this or implement this sort of flexible commuter benefit program that would involve a cost of some type to them. Essentially, it's the idea is to provide some type of subsidy to the folks that don't utilize the parking that many employers take advantage of, to sort of provide some incentive for them to not use their car. So what that means is that those employers are going to have to pay something. So that's just another one thing I want to point out. Again, this is an option that could result in some parking overflow, but it would be specifically more near Lake Grove and not, again, that consistent application throughout the city. And as I pointed out before, there's some interesting incentives in the baseline provisions for sustainable infrastructure and accessible units. So that's 2A. Moving on, 2B. You can see the list of cons here. There's a lot of cons for 2B. So again, this is kind of going back to the sub-options here. This is the parking management selection. So this is paid parking in Lake Grove, as well as reduction of residential and elimination of commercial parking requirements there. So yeah, as you can see, it would be very challenging to implement. It would involve us taking on a bunch of things that we don't currently do as a city, including paid on-street parking in particular. I think just one thing I wanted to point out is that Lake Grove, obviously, as we're all aware, doesn't have a ton of on-street parking. So I think there's a lot of gray area in terms of how we would even do this, what would comply with the LCD, and we'd really be in a back and forth about, all right, what is going to meet your standards here? So as you can imagine, there's just a lot of adverse impacts that this could result in. I think there's no additional flexibility in general for most development, although there is a little bit in Lake Grove for the reduction, but compared to the other options, the least flexible option.
Dr. Olson, may I jump in here for a quick second?
Please.
It's obvious that you did a lot of great work here, collecting all this information and making this really easily explainable to those of us up here. As I might speak for the whole council, if I may, you could probably breeze through most of this stuff.
No worries. I think
we're all kind of aligned on what we should do, but
sure.
If you do want to continue, I want to give you the credit for the great work, but just want to kind of give you a heads up.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I will move quick. And I just thought you'd be interested. I had already developed this, and I thought this was something I'd share with you all. But no, I understand your point. So moving on, option 3, I just want to point out, this is the most complex option. I think, it would be fairly fine-grained. Again, different types of residential have different types of requirements. It's pretty complex again, and I just made an assumption that we'd go with sub-option A because we're already required to eliminate parking within a half mile of the CFAs under option 3, and sub-option A is essentially requiring us to do that, but quarter mile, so we'd already comply. It would be just another sort of easy way to make it work. So that was my assumption here. So just to talk about the pros and cons, a little bit more pros on this side, but again, it is the most difficult option to explain. There might be some benefits when it comes to reducing regulatory barriers, but it would sort of have that same impact of really, having differing impacts throughout the city and the on-street sort of you could go through on-street parking here, but unbundling and various different things here would kind of also involve cost and staff burden, if that summarizes this well. So I'll keep moving here. you can kind of see the sort of layout of what this looks like. Option 1 has the most green, option 2B has the most red, option 3 and 2A are a little bit more mixed. But yeah, it's Christmas time, right? So lots of reds and green, trying to make it festive. All right, any questions about this? I'm assuming based on Councilor Rep's comment, not many.
Mr. Olson, this is really helpful, because it is a big thing to work through. And we had the one study session, and, we were kind of moving in one direction, but there were questions. So I think it's really important, and especially as we, as the city, explain this to the community, things like this are very helpful. And I think one big point I'm learning from your slides here is that no matter what option we choose, and I just want to clarify this, no matter what option we choose, we are repealing parking mandates. Well, we've already repealed them downtown, also in Lake Grove, in our two main town centers. No matter what we're doing, there are no parking mandates in Lake Grove or downtown.
Half space per residential max in Lake Grove for 2B. But
Right, okay, but in
More or
the
less,
commercial, yeah. So I think that's important to note, because really, then we're left with some other, how much benefit are we getting by implementing expensive, complicated, and difficult to understand regulatory schemes in scant areas of the city? What's the point? When we really, instead of just a universal. So that's kind of what I take away from, Councilor Booth.
Yeah, no, I just, like Aaron said, I really appreciate you saved, because I was confused on this. And as an educator who use sometimes the red pencil, when you look at this option, there is no brainer. Like, it's very simple. Like, for people who are also watching, it's option 1. Because the main thing that I only worry about is overflow in neighborhoods, people starting, but no matter what, I see that in all 3 of them, they overflow in neighborhood. And the one that doesn't have it has only 1 green. So it's 2B.
I think 2B could actually have a bit of that too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
I mean,
then,
yeah.
then you look at the thing and just say, guys, option 1.
Yep, 1.
Councilor Burdick. Thank you, Councilor Booth.
Yeah, I think this is, for me, it's a no-brainer. It's option 1. I just think we want to be ready to assist neighborhoods and start developing plans. I think we already know certain neighborhoods that will see some impacts. So, yeah, I think we just need to monitor, stay in good communication with those neighborhoods and be ready to support them
I'm
in
surprised
whatever
you
way
guys
is
are going for
reasonable.
1. That was what I was referring to.
Yes, 1.
Oh, no.
Well,
Okay.
one thing that I think we have to be cognizant of is that it's really hard to open up a small business these days. And we need to put every lever and effort that we possibly can to keep our community strong. And one of the things that we do have is we have a pretty magnetic small business community that is, the chamber's stronger. I think vacancy is down. I think a lot of the things are happening, and we're becoming more of a destination place for community members to spend time supporting our small businesses. And so I think that's something that, regardless of which option you pick, I think that's a primary concern that we have to have. And I will say, Mr. Olson, you did a great job. I love the packet because it's blank spaces on pros and blank spaces on cons. And it was not that you would stack a report, because you didn't, but I will say that it was so clear after you look at a visual standpoint that option 1 just makes a lot of sense. And also, labor costs are continue going up, and we're having fewer and fewer nickels and quarters in the couches to pay for staff. So we really have to focus them on things that really count.
Yeah.
And so I'd support option 1 100%.
Councilor Windland. Councilor Corrigan.
Yeah, I'd also like to say thank you for the excellent analysis. It's just mind-bending, and thank you very much. I continue to be concerned about Lake Grove. And I think that what this is doing clearly is this is forcing us to adapt. We will adapt, and we have to realize we do have other options, and one of the options that we have is urban renewal in Lake Grove, and we still have a couple projects there. One of them is parking. And I think if we, because Lake Oswego has 0 on-street parking, there's not a lot of ways for us to go. And I think the last thing we want to do is snuff out business in Lake Grove. So I think obviously option 1 is really the only way to go. The other options are more expensive, but we do have to realize we have other ways to go on it. I'd like to continue to think
So
about
can
that
I
as we
just
go
pile
forward.
on to that comment? Because I do think that what this set of regulations really does is shifts the burden in commercial areas from the private sector providing parking to the public sector providing parking in the long run, to the extent that it has to happen. So I agree that the pressure will happen in Lake Grove probably first, because we already feel the pressure from the Lake Grove business community. But I wouldn't want you to think it's just going to be in Lake Grove. As downtown continues to be redeveloped and we need parking to support development, we're just going to need to be aware that the pressure will be on the public sector to provide the parking unless the lending community requires it, right? The banks and the government is where the pressure goes now, as opposed to on the businesses. I do think in the long run, it's probably quite healthy. It's consolidated parking that's, thoughtfully located, as opposed to distributed parking, where the burden's put on the individual business, makes more sense in the long run. So it's a good shift. But I just think we need to be cognizant of the fact that we are going to have to think about strategic investments in consolidated and carefully located parking in the future. And that's just one of the ramifications of this if you look out 10 to 15 or 20 years.
Yeah, that's right. It's a good point. I look at this as this isn't a repeal of parking. This is just more, this is a smarter, more responsive way to manage parking. We see businesses now, look at the Lake Grove Shopping Center, great example. When they put the zoo pans in, they did that to our standards, and conformed to our parking standards, and they didn't have nearly enough parking. So what did they do? They didn't say, well, we're just not gonna have parking. No, I mean, they provided more parking, because they're not gonna run a center if they don't have parking. They're not gonna have tenants there. So businesses know how to adapt. There's no business out there that's just like, well, I'm not going to have parking, because they have no parking, they have no business. If they're a property owner with tenants, they have no tenants. So this is a way. The current system is a cookie cutter system. It's one size fits all. It's not responsive. It's not up to date. This leaves it more to individual businesses that operate at different hours to right size, parking to what they need. And I said this last time, I'll emphasize it again. This is part of a larger policy. We think about, this is about climate friendly and equitable communities, right? So this is about us continuing to move the direction we're moving with building safe pathways and bikeways and connecting our neighborhoods to our schools, connecting our neighborhoods to the business community, all things we're investing in, but to continue that investment as a part of this, just like Councilor Corrigan and Ms. Bennett, mentioned. It's all of these things working together. Maybe it is some of the city invested in parking, but it's also the continued investment in active transportation and things that help create a healthier community. And that's, of course, the direction our community wants to go anyway. So it's all, I think, very positive. Councilor Afghan.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you for your
Mayor.
patience.
I have a clarifying question on option 1. Mr. Olson, if we go to option 1 that had only one con, that it may or may not have village over into the neighborhood. Question is, if downtown area and Lake Grove Business District already doesn't have any parking restriction, then which neighborhood that already could happen or could not happen? So that's not the concern of this question. Which other neighborhood were you thinking that option 1 could have an over spillage into those neighborhoods?
I don't have any specific neighborhood that I would identify, and I think that's a very good point that you make, that there would be potential for the sort of spillover in downtown and Lake Grove under all of these options. So really what we'd look at is potentially the commercial areas outside of downtown and Lake Grove. But it's so hard to predict that I'm not sure we could say anything with any certainty. But those would be some of the areas where you would see different regulations as a result of option 1.
I guess I'm trying to turn this into a logic that I understand. If the majority of the areas that we do already have parking challenges, then that's out of the conversation for today. It's already happening. So I don't see any other neighborhood that we could have over a spillage. So I'm not sure even option 1 con is a con.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's speculative and just kind of putting it out there as, the concern we've heard expressed.
Well, I
right?
think that
And,
just because parking management isn't on the list, of option 1, it doesn't mean it's not something we wouldn't look at in the future. If, in downtown, as things develop future, the parking became some kind of greater issue. I think that's what Councilor Burdick and I know Councilor Corrigan has said before. We come and keep our eyes open and monitor as things go forward. And it just certainly isn't precluding us from implementing other options down the road, even if we do the simple full repeal as the current. But now, did you have, I know you had an additional slide there.
I have a couple more slides, but I will be very quick. And
Because I know
there's
you want
not,
to talk about the schedule.
yeah, just the schedule is the biggest thing.
Isn't the requirement for bicycle parking going to take care of everything?
He's going to talk?
Yeah, it'll make everybody switch to bikes.
Yeah,
100%, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so on that subject, there have been some updates to the CFAC rules, and they're fairly minimal. I just wanted to point them out because there was an official sort of adoption of these rules in November. So really, for the most part, there aren't any super substantive changes. A lot of the things are just kind of formalizing what were the temporary rules that were adopted back in April. The most substantive thing, I would say, is there's a revised requirement that we have to require as a city 1 bicycle parking space for every 2 multifamily units, or 1.5 space per unit. Previously, it would have been 1 space per unit. So they walked that back a bit, and that's really what this change is. Yeah, I mean, it could be a facility of different kinds. It can be some they have a little bit more involved situations where it's a gated area and you go in and hang up your bike or something. But yeah, it's not too prescriptive on that, and that's some of the language that they changed. But that would just be a difference from our code, which for multifamily units now requires 1 space per every 4 multifamily units. So a little bit more stringent of a bicycle parking requirement, but less stringent than what they originally were envisioning. And I really wanted to end with just talking through a revised schedule here. I don't want to go over every single date here. You'll see that the general idea is that after today's study session, I will go out and hopefully with assistance of some type, but as a project manager, I will go out to the community and do some outreach, essentially targeting specific areas or specific groups, community groups that I have identified on the next slide and we'll talk a bit about. But the idea is that basically the next chunk of work will be going out to the community, hearing what they have to say. Then we'll come back on April 16th with a joint meeting of the City Council and Planning Commission, and I will get that sort of official direction on which option to draft into a code amendment, and then we'll sort of go from there. The Planning Commission, bring it back to the council in fairly late in the year, just due to some of the time constraints that we have with other projects and the amount of time it requires to notice all this stuff, but that we would come back to the council in November of next year for a hearing. That is the schedule here, but really that's just building in a lot of that time for community conversations and February and March of next year. And then we'll come back to you in April. So that's kind of the idea here. Some of those stakeholders that we would perform the outreach to would be the Sustainability Network, go out to the Mayor's Roundtable, as we did for the housing work, go to the Chamber of Commerce. We've already gone to them, but we can return to them and sort of engage them further. The Neighborhood Chairs Committee and the Transportation Advisory Board. And then we'd also sort of think about focus group discussion with reps from all of those different organizations, as well as the HPS Task Force and Sustainability Advisory Board and the DEI Advisory Board. And we'd also be doing an open house community meeting in addition to the typical sort of planning commission, city council meetings that we always do here, and the regular sort of website updates, hello, and email list. So that's kind of the idea. And really, I just want to know if you have any input or guidance on that engagement plan, or any aspects or just kind of values that you think weren't sort of incorporated in those pros and cons that should be stressed a bit more when we go out to the community, or just any guidance you have for this next stage. and whether or not you would sign off on the engagement plan to begin with.
That's a good question.
Well, Courtney, yeah, please, Councilman.
So how does this tie in with all the housing production stuff? Because I guess I'm looking at this and I think kind of like, okay, I mean, maybe not everyone's going to agree, but we pretty much have consensus that option one is kind of the direction to go in. Are we putting too much burden on your organization to deal with this, with all the outreaches and everything else, in addition to the housing production? And I mean, I would kind of like to, I mean,
Yeah.
I would almost, if I may, suggest what's truly required. And I mean, I see two very, very talented, exceptional people at this table. You have limited bandwidth, and I would really love to have you spend your time dealing with the stuff that really needs to be dealt with from the city of Lake Oswego standpoint, if that makes sense. And just like the naming of the buildings, I mean, we could have had 15 meetings of things going on, and I think we came to a fairly quick conclusion. I'm worried about both of your heads exploding with the housing stuff and everything else, and frankly, how much time we're going to spend as a city and staff time on something like this, where it seems like a logical conclusion. And so I guess and be very, very honest, I know you're sitting in front of the city manager, but.
No, I think the question's a good one, and maybe I can ask it of them in a different way, which is if we turn this into essentially a discussion about option one, as opposed to a discussion about all three options. If our outreach plan was really we're headed towards option one, we want to make sure everybody understands it. We want to make sure we've talked about the potential impacts on I mean, I definitely think we need to talk to the neighborhood chairs and the business associations. But if we really streamed it down and said, as opposed to going out and trying to explain all this to you, we're working towards repealing our parking mandates to comply with state law, and thought of it as an educational campaign, how would that affect the timeline? Could you do it faster, I think is what Councilor Wendland's asking.
Or just in
Or with
place
less
up.
resources.
I mean, I'd rather have you spend more time on the housing stuff so that we get that right, or whatever else that you have going on. I mean, you know, I mean, throw this over the comms team. I mean, you've got the messaging.
I definitely think we need to have more of a dialogue with the neighborhood associations in particular, rather than a telling, but a discussion, because I think we need to understand what their perspective on sort of what would be the points at which we would consider parking management. Like, what would be the place where we started to affect quality of life? And I think that we're going to get that perspective from the neighborhood. So we do need some outreach before we have an ordinance in front of you. But I hear your point, which is, as opposed to having let's find out what people think about these three options. If we really said, we're really leaning this way, that seems to be the most logical way to go. What are your concerns? How could we mitigate those concerns, instead of how do we weigh these options?
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
Good question.
I think the short answer is yes. I think we could compress the timeline on this, because if we ultimately go with option one, there's a lot less work that would need to be done afterwards in order to sort of study the options and develop the amendments. If we were doing a parking management option, obviously, we'd have to look in what the budgetary impacts are. I mean, that would be a huge thing. So I think the answer is yes, it would reduce the staff time and workload that will need to go into this, and we would certainly welcome the time to focus more on the housing production strategies, which is keeping us quite busy.
And ministerial mitigations.
Yes, that's coming up too in February.
There are other projects,
Ministerial mitigations. Right.
Um,
Okay, so we're hearing, we don't have, there's no requirement, there's no kind of de minimis. I mean, we see that we want a minimum, but there's no state requirement that we have.
No, and it is primarily a compliance project, so I think what I propose is probably more than what I've seen in other jurisdictions that are larger, but
So does everyone agree that a plan that has some outreach to the neighborhoods and the business community, that starts to socialize the idea of option one versus, like Ms. Bennett said, the difference between the options, because this is too much to swallow even in a meeting. And we've hashed over this at several meetings and read through, I mean, hundreds of pages to understand this. And we're not going to expect that of anyone at a community meeting. You know?
Right.
But it is important to that the community understands the rationale and where we're headed and why it's important and what the benefits are, and what we're keeping our eyes open for.
So I guess the question would be, do you want me to come back to council before a hearing on this?
I don't, well,
I think it depends on what we hear.
yeah.
I think it depends on what we hear. And I think if we hear a general understanding and support for the council's direction, then we don't need to. But if you have something come up from the neighborhoods or from the business community where you really have a big policy question, then we come back in study session and we get you guys to answer that question.
I think that sounds good, like a good idea. We don't need the planning commission too laboring over this extensively, They do such a good job, and I know that they really get into the weeds, but I think that we see that there's pretty clear consensus here which direction we want to head.
That's very helpful to have this. Any thoughts or, I think I don't want to come back with like a revised engagement plan to you all again, but I can, sort of adjust it per your direction here.
And then this should not take us until then December, because it will be easy, if the feedback, we hear is as expected. I'm sure there'll be concerns and questions and whatnot that we can answer then.
Yeah, actually, going back to Councilor Wendland, I think you had asked about, is this, how does this line up with HPS work? And, do we need to do these on the same timeline? The original idea was that we would do them at the same timeline, but having gone into the HPS work a bit at this point, I do think it would actually be helpful to know where we're going on this earlier, even for the HPS work. It would sort of help us kind of just move quicker. So, so I think it could be beneficial for both. Yeah.
And if there are other things that you're working on that you need sort of immediate feedback from us, I would say get it sooner, and maybe we can try to provide direction if it helps save time and efficiency moving forward. I don't, in any stretch of the imagination, want to take off public input and everything else, because I think we do a very good job in Lake Oswego doing that. But I also think that there's time is special, and it's a commodity that is pretty short and precious. So we need to use our resources in the best possible ways, because if we had too much stuff doing, we're not going to do anything very well. So concentrate on the things that really are going to make a huge difference long-term for our citizens. Things they'll care about. The things that if we can make really good decisions, we won't have, the chamber filled with people. I guess that's I think on the parking thing, I don't think this is that different than what we're dealing with now, so.
Yeah, there's only a few options that we have to select from, and ultimately none of them will make folks happy if you're concerned about, parking requirements and such, so, yeah.
Councilor Afghan has a question here. Councilor Afghan.
Mr. Mayor, I think the scope of this change is so small and so limited that I think we can give the staff direction to only focus on option one. But at the same time, we have to go through our own process to make that decision, meaning the outreach and so on and so forth. So the impact, if any, would be so limited that just simply because the downtown area and Lake Grove business area, those are outside of this conversation. So I think option one is the one to focus on, as well as we go through our own process to make that decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Afghan. Yeah, I think those comments are in concert with the plan going forward here. Yeah, okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sound good? This is great. Thank you very much. Thank you again, Mr. Olson, for the detailed report and the way you organized it. That was very helpful. It's great work. Great work.
And for the first time, the last thing on the agenda is not at 9 or 10 o'clock.
No, 7:37. Look at this. Okay, so we move to information from. No, we don't. Hold on. No, we don't. Information, yeah, okay, got it. Information from council. Does anyone have anything they want to share? No? Okay. Okay, well, I would just, we ran, I don't know if any of you took it, the Sustainability Advisory Board ran a EV charging survey, and they got the results back. It was kind of interesting. It was pretty interesting. It was very good. A lot of people took it. And, maybe as expected, like charging at home is the most popular option. Charging in multifamily is more challenging. And the biggest need people recognize was the need for just more fast charging, in town. Anyway, SAB's been very focused on that, and it's part of the EV charging strategy that Ms. Watson is putting together in cooperation with that board, so it's good. You notice the signs, the EV signs identifying where there's EV parking around town. That was a result of their efforts too, so also very good. They're also working on a greenhouse gas emissions inventory update right now as well, which is challenging, kind of weighing the cost benefit of that work. Yeah, Councilman Burke.
I just want to do a shout out to Parks and Rec. What a great job they did at the holiday tree lighting. It was fantastic. So just thank you, Mayor, for your words. And it was just a great time. And again, they pulled it off, all the lights, everything came on beautifully. Yes. So I know that was really challenging to coordinate, and they nailed it. And a lot of fabulous feedback. A lot of people said it's the best one yet.
Yeah, it was
So
by
I've heard that
far,
from
yeah.
multiple people. So I just wanted to do a shout out and a thank you.
That's great. Okay, Ms. Bennett.
Only thing I have is I think Madison sent you all a draft today of a letter to reply to the board of the River Grove Water District. They've asked us to build a sidewalk on Childs at the same time. And although I think we would love to do it, I think at this point it would be really tough to juggle unfunded priorities or funded priorities to add an unfunded priority. So if you're all in agreement with that, we'll ask the mayor to sign that letter. Okay. It's a great thinking on their part, and maybe if they'd done it 2 years earlier, we could have really leapt on it, but I think it would really break commitments we've made to other projects. Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right, thank you, everyone. We're adjourned.
Man, wow.
Good job, everybody.
Before 8.
Great work.
Great, if it had been half an hour.